What's up, everyone? Imagine waking up you're in ancient Athens, living as a friend of Socrates himself. No phones, no Wi-Fi, just philosophy, olive oil, and a whole lot of questions. That's exactly what happened to you. A modern human stuck in the body of an Athenian, navigating the chaos of 5th century BCE life. As Socrates' childhood friend, witness his journey from his childhood to his old age and be part of history. Join him as you figure out how to thrive or just survive in one of history's most legendary eras. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, because trust me, you don't want to miss this now. Let's start. You wake up as an Athenian in the narrow alleys of Elopes, an outlying district of Athens where clay-tiled roofs slant toward the sky and rough stone walls hold the hush of sleepers. The horizon blazes faint pink as roosters call beneath open windows. A child's cry echoes from somewhere close by. From chicken in small yards, goats stir and bleat. The smell of barley porridge drifts on cool air. Somewhere, a pot on an open hearth crackles as embers glow. You feel earth beneath your sandals cold, damp from last night's dew, and hear distant laughter as village children chase one another with wooden swords carved by the local craftsmen. This is not the grand Athens of marble temples. It is simpler, quieter. Yet in these humble lanes, a gift is about to be born. Following the soft glow of lamplight, you arrive at a modest dwelling where morning labor begins. You see Socrates crouched over a square slab of limestone, chisel in hand. With each deliberate tap, shards of white stone scatter. He shapes an image of Athene eyes serene, helmet adorned meant not for a Parthenon pediment, but for a roadside shrine within the home. By the hearth's golden warmth, Phanerette stirs a pot of gruel, and Phanerette tends to her pots. The boy wanders the courtyard, lifting a chisel to strike stone himself. His first attempts are clumsy. The rock resists his eager taps. Frustrated, he steps back and plucks a scrap of plaster from his father's bench. He rolls it between his fingers, pondering the difference between hard and soft, shape and emptiness. His mother calls him to eat. He sits on a low stool, scraping porridge from his bowl. He watches his parents, one sculpting bodies from stone, the other helping souls enter the world, and wonders at their gifts. In a quiet voice, he asks, "Mother, when you bring a child into life, what gives that life its shape?" She pauses, spoon halfway to her lips, as if caught between nourishment and reflection. Smiling, she replies, "Life shapes itself in many ways, my son, through nurture, through nature. But the first shape is in the mind of the mother who calls its name." He nods, not fully understanding, but feeling a spark. What if ideas also have shapes? What if questions could bring truths into life? After breakfast, you follow the boy to the village well, where neighbors gather to draw water. A shoemaker hunches over a leather boot, pressing a wooden sole to its upper. He hisses instructions to an apprentice, who darts about with needle and thread. From nearby, a potter's wheel hums as clay spins, hands coaxing it into amphorae. Encouraged by his mother's words, Socrates approaches the shoemaker. "Excuse me, sir, when you say a boot fits, what do you mean? Does the leather know where to bend? Or do you shape the foot?" The shoemaker chuckles, wiping sweat from his brow. "Boy, safety and comfort make a boot fit, but comfort comes from me knowing how the foot moves." Unconvinced, the boy counters, "But how do you know comfort when you see it? If you never wore the boot yourself, how can you feel it?" The shoemaker frowns, surprised. He tries to follow the question, but grows frustrated, returning to his cobbling. Around the well, villagers murmur. Some shake their heads. A few smile at his boldness. You sense the spark of a method. Questions not to trap, but to awaken thought. Though Elopes remains rural, its heartbeat is Athens. Atop nearby hills, construction crews haul marble blocks for the Parthenon. Festivities to honor Athena bristle with music and sacrifice. In the city's heart, Pericles' vision of democracy and artistic splendor flourishes. Yet beyond the grandeur, the city's soul stirs. You catch distant strains of aulos and lyre musicians rehearsing for a festival of Dionysus. Actors in mask soon will tread red-dusted stages, reciting tragedies that examine fate justice, and the gods. Philosophers wander the porticos, debating life's greatest questions. This is the Athens that beckons Socrates' mind from the village workshop. Within elopes, formal schooling occurs in a small courtyard beneath an olive tree. A teacher recites Homer's epics while students trace letters into wax tablets. Socrates learns the alphabet, basic arithmetic, and the hymns to the gods. Between lessons, he sneaks behind the schoolhouse to observe older boys practicing wrestling, their bodies gleaming with oil and dust. One afternoon, he overhears the local Pita tribe instructing, "Strength of body comes from discipline of training. Strength of mind comes from discipline of study." Socrates ponders how to train the mind as rigorously as the body. If wrestling shapes the muscles, can questions shape the soul? Though young, he hears whispers of a certain philosopher who asks everyone trivial-seeming questions that unravel their certainty. They call him a gadfly, annoying some, enlightening others. Socrates wonders if this man could be Plato's teacher. Perhaps one day he'll journey to the city and seek him out. You imagine him, backpack slung over a shoulder, sneaking past his father's workshop at dusk to glimpse Plato's tutors walking in the shaded groves. Already, he feels torn between the village that birthed him and the world that beckons him. Back at home, Phanerik prepares dinner stew of lentils, wild greens, warm flatbread. The aroma fills the air. Sophroniskis recounts an afternoon's work. A wealthy landowner commissioned a relief of Demeter. The boy listens, alert to every word. When supper ends, he sits at his mother's feet, gazing up. "Mother, when the priest prays to Demeter, does she hear the stone image or the voice of the supplicant?" Phanerik meets his gaze. The god hears the prayer in the heart. The stone only holds the image, so people have somewhere to look. Worship is the voice of belief, not the shape of stone. He nods, understanding dawning. Stone and voice form and meaning are separate. He recalls his father's careful shaping of marble, then his own questions probing deeper. A pattern emerges. The world's forms are superficial. The soul's truths lie beneath. Weeks later, a friend returns from Delphi with startling news. Apollo's oracle pronounced Socrates the wisest of all men. The boy hears the tale in awe and confusion. How could he, who could barely fit his shoes, be wiser than generals and statesmen? Returning home, he confronts his parents. Sophroniskis listens intently. "Son, either the god plays a jest on men, or you indeed know something they do not." Phanerik lays a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Wisdom is knowing what you do not know. Perhaps Apollo sees that at your core." A hush follows. The moon rises, reflecting in their eyes. In that moment, Socrates vows to seek the truth by questioning all who claim to know it. Now the sun stands higher. Children compete in impromptu foot races. The potter lifts a finished amphora from his wheel. Sophroniskis closes his carving as the workday ends. Phanerik tidies the hearth. You follow Socrates as he steps onto the lame barefoot, simple cloak draped. In his hands, a piece of marble now carved into an unfinished face. In his mind, 1,000 questions dot this boy, humble, unassuming, relentless, will one day stand barefoot before the leaders of Athens, asking them to define justice, courage, virtue. He will astonish, provoke, and endure. All from beginnings in a dusty village where stone met soul, and midwifery met mind. Your journey with him has only just begun. You step into the Agra as mid-morning sun gilds its marble columns. The air vibrates with voices. Merchants hawking fresh figs and olives, potters extolling new amphorae, fishmongers lifting silvery mackerel for display. Philosophers in simple cloaks have staked out shaded corners beneath the colonnades. You glimpse them leaning toward eager listeners, gesturing with calm authority. In the distance, The white crest of the Acropolis looms its temples silent witnesses to the marketplace's ceaseless hum. This bustling square is where Socrates, once the curious boy from Elopes, now comes to practice his craft. Not chisels or clay, but questions sharp, persistent, and unstoppable. After his early years in Elopes, Socrates ventured here as a young man. His feet, still bare, carried him over cracked stone paving, worn smooth by generations. He could have pursued any of the established sophists, those paid teachers of rhetoric and persuasion. But he refused to charge fees. For him, wisdom was not a commodity. Instead, he claimed no revenue, no title, only an unquenchable thirst for truth. Imagine him weaving through the crowd. He pauses at a merchant's stall. Tell me, friend, why? Do you call one coin fair and another false? Is it weight, metal, or the trust we place in it? The merchant frowns, hefting a silver piece in his hand. It's agreed by law. It carries the state's stamp. Socrates steps back. But if we trust the law, why question its stamp? Does fairness come from agreement or from something deeper? Before the merchant can reply, Socrates has moved on, already drawn by another voice, another question. The sophists held court nearby. Extravagant robes, dramatic gestures, promises to teach influence. They believed truth was relative, shaped by words, by power, by persuasion. Socrates saw them as rivals, but not enemies. Rather, he viewed their methods as an opportunity. One day, he stood beside Protagoras of Abdera, the sophist who famously declared, "Man is the measure of all things." Socrates asked, "If man is the measure, what measure do we use when two men disagree?" Protagoras paused, then countered with a flourish. "Perception guides each man. What is right for one is right for another." Socrates pressed on. If perception is all, then the same act may be both just and unjust, which makes justice meaningless. A small crowd gathered, drawn by their debate. Yet Protagoras, confident in his rhetorical skill, turned the question into a lesson in oratory. Socrates, unmoved, simply observed how easily polished words could obscure deeper meaning. From the edge of the gathering, a young student, later to be Plato, watched in fascination. He saw that Socrates' aim was not to win applause, but to uncover contradiction. On another occasion, Socrates paused near the statue of Hephaestus, where craftsmen rested between blows of hammer and chisel. A potter, converse, was teaching his apprentice how to fire clay. Socrates asked softly, "Is a good pot one that burns evenly, or one that holds wine well? Or both? What makes a perfect vessel?" The potter stroked his chin. "A perfect pot endures heat, holds liquid without leaking, and pleases the eye." Socrates squatted beside him. "But if a pot pleases structurally but is ugly, is it still good? And if it is beautiful, but cracks easily, what then?" The apprentice, used to straightforward craft, grew frustrated. But the potter, somewhat amused, acknowledged that Socrates' questions forced him to consider beauty, utility, and endurance as separate virtues. These spontaneous conversations formed the heart of the Agora's living classroom. No official lectures, no syllabi, just Socrates' unwavering insistence that each definition withstand its own scrutiny. Walking the shaded colonnades of the Stoa Poikile, Socrates refined his approach. He asked questions that led to more questions, each answer revealing hidden assumptions. This iterative probing became known as the Socratic method. Question: identify a claim or belief. Examination: probe its meaning and basis. Contradiction: reveal inconsistencies or uncertainties. Reformulation: encourage a deeper or more precise definition. Observe him with a group of youths near the limestone benches. A student asserts, "Courage is fearlessness." Socrates replies, "If fearlessness is courage, Then is irrational recklessness also courage? The student pauses, uncomfortable. Perhaps courage is something more than the absence of fear. Then what? Socrates leans forward, and so the dialogue deepens. Fear, knowledge, prudence, virtue, each term dissected until something like a glimmer of clarity emerges. In the market's religious corner were small altars to Hermes. And Hestia's stand, Socrates once confronted a priest about the nature of piety. Is piety doing what the gods love? Or do the gods love what is pious? The priest frowned. He had never been asked to define his own rituals. He had memorized prayers, but never examined them. Under Socrates' gentle yet relentless questioning, he realized that without a clear definition, piety was only tradition, not understanding. Nearby worshippers grew uneasy. Sacred customs seemed under threat not by sacrilege, but by analysis. Yet Socrates never disrespected the gods. He sought to comprehend the moral foundations behind religious practice. While many despised Socrates' relentless questioning as a nuisance, others were drawn to his honesty. Wealthy youths like Alcibiades, charming and impulsive, followed him into the gymnasium to test their virtues. Quiet philosophers like Xenophon took notes on his dialogues. Even prominent citizens, craftsmen, musicians, dramatists took turns at being questioned. Imagine a small circle gathered on a grassy slope by the academy. Socrates stands at the center, simple cloak swaying. What is justice? What is the good life? What is virtue? The answers flutter like birds, some confident, some hesitant. Under Socrates' guide, each answer takes flight and crashes, revealing underlying ignorance. Yet the process ignites minds. Something alive emerges from that broken ground, self-reflection. Amid the tumult of questions, Socrates spoke of a different guide, a daemonian, an inner voice that warned him against error. When asked about this, he described it not as an instruction to act, but as a caution. Whenever I proceed, if the daemonian whispers against it, I stop. Otherwise, I continue. This private compass fascinated those who heard of it. Was it divine inspiration, conscience, madness, or moral instinct? To Socrates, it was an intimate guide, as reliable as any oracle, but personal and internal. It reinforced his belief that each person carried within a spark of insight, if only they would listen. Socrates' growing reputation unsettled the powerful. Politicians, generals, and orators, accustomed to unquestioned authority, found their assumptions under siege. In quieter corners of the agora, whispers grew. He corrupts the youth. He denies the gods. He ruins reputations with needless doubts. Yet Socrates never sought to overthrow the city or its institutions. He claimed only to examine human souls, to awaken self-awareness. His humility, I know nothing, made him all the more dangerous. Asterisk despite his influence, Socrates lived simply. He wore the same cloak year-round, paid no fees, and ate modest meals. He preferred the company of students under olive trees to the luxury of symposiums. His table conversation was his academy. One evening, you find him under a pavilion, eating a bowl of lentils with friends. They laugh, they debate. Someone asks, Master, why dine so plainly when Athens supplies so many delicacies? He smiles. My body needs little. My mind needs challenge. And the city's banquet is best served with questions. The sun tilts west as you leave the agora. Torches will soon be lit. Nightly gatherings under stars will continue. Sellers close their stalls. The city exhales. You walk back to Elopes, passing the same well, the same pottery stalls, but now everything seems charged with possibility. Questions left in the agora echo in your mind. What is justice? What is virtue? What is the good life? Socrates, the boy turned gadfly, has transformed the marketplace into a forge of thought. demanding that Athens itself examine its soul or face the consequences. Your journey with him veers now from dusty lanes into deeper waters, where virtue, knowledge, and ethics swirl in endless dialogue. And as you step into twilight, you know that the seeds sown here will grow into storms that shake the very foundations of the city. Athenian hillside, sun-seated sitting on a hill, just beyond the city walls. The sun is lowering, casting honey-colored light over the rooftops of Athens. From here, the Parthenon gleams like a crown. You hear distant lyres, occasional laughter, and the steady pulse of sandals over stone. The agora is quieter now, but the ideas planted there continue to echo through minds, through homes, through generations. And among those minds, Socrates is beginning to truly awaken, not just as a local thinker, but as something more from his boyhood in Elopes. And early days wandering the agora, Socrates had always questioned things, boots, pottery, prayers. But now, something shifts. You see it in how he walks slower past the academy's gates, in how his questions become more refined, more surgical. One evening, while walking with a group of friends through the gymnasium, someone mentions a tragedy they saw at the Dionysia festival. Socrates tilts his head. Why do we call Oedipus guilty if his actions were fated? Is guilt determined by intent or consequence? The others pause, expecting a light conversation, not a philosophical inquiry. But Socrates is not asking to amuse. He's asking to understand, to disassemble human behavior as if it were a vase on a wheel turning, analyzing, reforming. You begin to realize this is no longer a curious craftsman's son. This is a man becoming a philosopher. It's believed Socrates may have studied under Archelaus, a pupil of Anaxagoras, who in turn had brought Ionian philosophy to Athens. Anaxagoras taught that everything in the universe is composed of infinitely divisible particles nous, mind being the principle that organizes it. You imagine Socrates standing in the back of an open-air lecture, listening as Archelaus explains. The cosmos is governed not by gods, but by order, reason, mind, nous. To a young man taught by tradition and myth, this must have struck like lightning. If the universe has an internal logic, if the stars aren't merely fireballs, but governed by laws, then what governs the soul? This question haunts him. It's no longer enough to ask about piety or justice in civic terms. Socrates begins, looking inward. Unlike other thinkers of the time who were fascinated by astronomy, geometry, or physics, Socrates turns philosophy in a radical new direction. Ethics. He begins to ask not just what the world is made of, but what people are. Made of? What makes someone good? He wanders through the streets now with greater intensity. He questions the butcher about fairness in trade. He questions the teacher about whether memorizing Homer makes a child wise. He questions a newlywed couple about the nature of love. Is love desire? And if it is desire, does that mean it is always rooted in lack? The husband stammers. The wife, amused, replies, "Desire is what made him chase me." Socrates nods. Then should we thank our lack for guiding us to fulfillment? Every encounter becomes a dialogue, every question a spark. You see Athens differently through his eyes, not just as a city of laws and rituals, but as a living puzzle. As his inquiries deepen, so does his following. He's not wealthy. He's not powerful. He's not particularly attractive. But his intellect, his courage to expose ignorance, attracts the most curious minds. Among them, Plato, a noble youth with a poet's heart, and a mathematician's mind. Xenophon, a practical soldier who appreciated Socrates' clarity. Alcibiades, brilliant, handsome, impulsive, seduced by Socratic wisdom, but never able to live up to it. Antisthenes, who would later found the Cynic school, valuing poverty and virtue. They trail him like moths to a flame. Some want truth. Others want to be seen at his side. A few hope to defeat him in argument, most fail. Amid all the rational inquiry, one thing distinguishes Socrates. His spiritual conscience is daemonian. A quiet inner voice, he claims, speaks only to warn, never to instruct. It tells him when not to speak, not to act, not to follow a certain path. You ask yourself, is this madness? Or insight? Others certainly wonder. The religious see it as troubling. What mortal man claims guidance from an inner spirit? And yet, Socrates insists this is no rejection of the gods, but a deeper form of reverence. It is personal virtue, not public sacrifice, that honors the divine. He tells his students, the unexamined life is not worth living. But to examine life is not to reject the gods, it is to meet them honestly. One afternoon in the Agora, a young man named Euthyphro claims to know what piety is. Socrates begins his familiar process. You say piety is doing what the gods love, but do the gods always agree? Euthyphro hesitates. Then is something pious because the gods love it? Or do the gods love it because it is pious? The question seems simple, but it shatters Euthyphro's confidence. He retreats, confused. You hear Socrates say afterward, I am a midwife of souls. I do not plant ideas, but help others give birth to what is already within them. This metaphor, inspired by his mother's profession, becomes central to his mission. He delivers doubt not to destroy, but to liberate. He awakens minds with the pain of self-realization. And yet, this introspective mind is also a warrior. During the Peloponnesian War, Socrates serves with distinction in several battles, Potidaea, Delium, and Amphipolis. You wouldn't expect the barefoot philosopher to shine on the battlefield, but he does. At Potidaea, he famously saves the life of Alcibiades, standing over him through an enemy onslaught. At Delium, when the Athenian line collapses, Socrates walks calmly through retreating troops, so composed that enemies hesitate to attack. Fellow soldiers speak of his endurance, his courage, his control in hunger and fatigue. They whisper, he fears nothing. Philosophy, it seems, gives him more than wisdom. It gives him strength. But not everyone admires him. As his following grows, so do the whispers. He corrupts the youth. He mocks tradition. He makes fools of proud men. Socrates shrugs off the criticism, but you can sense the unease building. Athens is tired. The war with Sparta has drained its coffers, dimmed its optimism. In such times, societies do not tolerate people who undermine confidence. They want certainty, not questions. Socrates offers only doubt. And worse, some of his students, like Alcibiades, go on to betray Athens. Others flirt with tyrannical rule. Though Socrates never teaches sedition, the city begins to hold him accountable for his followers' actions. You sit with him one evening under the stars, beside a trickling fountain outside the city gates. He leans back, arms behind his head, and says softly, I know nothing. And in that, I know more than those who pretend to know everything. It's not just humility. It's a principle. The belief that truth is a lifelong pursuit, not a possession. That virtue is something to be practiced, not preached. That wisdom begins when you stop pretending you have it. His life is not yet near its end, but something is shifting. You feel it. And as the breeze rustles the olive trees and dogs bark in the distance, you realize this quiet, strange man has already changed Athens just by walking, talking, asking. Athenian city. Wall dusk. The sun dips behind the low mountains surrounding Athens. You stand on the parapet of the city wall, wind catching the folds of your cloak. Far below, torchlight flickers along the road supply carts returning from the countryside, soldiers drilling in formation, blacksmiths hammering armor into shape. The air tastes of iron, smoke, and tension. War has come again. Athens and Sparta, locked in a contest that will define the century. You wonder, how does a man like Socrates, who searches for virtue and wisdom, fit into the chaos of war? And then you see him walking calmly past the armory, barefoot, cloak over his shoulder, bronze helmet under one arm. In Athens, every citizen is a soldier. Military service is not just expected, it is duty. Socrates, now a man in his 30s, answers the call. Not because he loves war, but because he believes civic responsibility and virtue must be tested in the real world, not just in conversation. That he joins as a hoplite, a Muans, heavily armed foot soldier in the phalanx formation. In this wall of shields and spears, there is no room for ego, no space for fear. You must trust the man beside you. And Socrates proves to be that man. The siege of Patadia on the Chalcidice Peninsula is long and brutal. Winter bites through tunics. Food runs low. The enemy within the walls resists with tenacity. Socrates endures the hardship without complaint. He eats less than the younger men, sleeps on the ground, meditates in silence while others drink and argue. When frost makes breathing painful, Socrates walks barefoot, steady, unaffected. Plato would later recount how Socrates stood motionless one morning, deep in thought, eyes fixed on the horizon, for hours, then into the night, then through dawn, still thinking, still searching, until, at last, he bowed to the sun and resumed his day as if nothing had happened. And when battle comes chaotic, deafening, filled with shrieks and gore, Socrates moves with the same serenity. In the frenzy of blood and mud, he shields a wounded Alcibiades, then a handsome, arrogant, noble youth, later to become infamous. While others panic, Socrates stands his ground, calm, precise, alive. 10 years later, Athens launches an offensive. In Boeotia, at Delium, their forces are routed. Chaos erupts, soldiers throw down shields, fleeing the battlefield. You imagine the moment, dust blinding, men shouting, commanders slain. But Socrates does not flee. He walks backward, calmly covering the retreat of his comrades, spear ready, eyes sharp. Plato records how the enemy, startled by his composure, hesitate to attack him, believing such stillness must belong to someone protected by the gods. It's as if his internal peace creates a kind of invisible armor. Later, around a campfire, a fellow soldier asks him, "Socrates, how can you remain so fearless?" He replies, "I am not fearless. I simply know that what we fear is often only our ignorance. Fear is thinking the unknown is the worst. But if death is unknown, how do we know it's bad?" The soldier blinks, confused. "So you do not fear death?" He asks, "I fear injustice more," Socrates says. "To die having never asked what is right, that is the worst death of all." By the time Socrates returns to Athens, his reputation has grown not only as a thinker, but as a man of extraordinary self-discipline. Soldiers speak of his refusal to drink, his tolerance for pain, his unmatched focus in combat. But that respect is mixed with something else: discomfort. Upper classes begin to murmur, "This man fights like a machine. Who can trust one who feels no fear? He humbles noblemen with words. What else could he topple?" Even on the battlefield, he questions the gods. What if he corrupts our children? Athens is proud, but also increasingly insecure. And Socrates' growing influence now treads dangerous ground. As the Peloponnesian War drags on, Athens begins to rot from within. The once proud democracy grows paranoid. Its generals grow ambitious. Its citizens grow tired. Socrates watches it all unfold. He sees Alcibiades, his former student, seduce the city with charm and promises only to betray it, flee to Sparta. Then Persia, then back to Athens again like a political chameleon. He sees demagogues use emotional rhetoric to sway the assembly, careless with logic, addicted to applause. Socrates stands at the Nix Hill during one such session and mutters, "They do not seek truth. They seek only the sweet sound of agreement." Meanwhile, the sophists gain power. They train young men in persuasion for a price. They teach how to win arguments, not how to find truth. Socrates finds their influence dangerous. He says, they make the worse argument appear better. They sell speech without soul. And yet, the public begins to confuse Socrates with them. After all, doesn't he also question everything? Doesn't he also speak in riddles, humbling the powerful? This confusion will come back to haunt him. It's no secret that Socrates is skeptical of democracy, not because he favors tyranny, but because he believes uneducated opinion is no guide to virtue. You remember one of his sharpest remarks. Would you let a random man build your ship simply because he had an equal vote? Or would you want a trained navigator? He argues, the same must be true of the soul of the state. Not every voice carries equal wisdom. This doesn't sit well in a city built on equality. To question democracy is to question Athens itself. And so, his questioning becomes dangerous. In 404 BCE, Athens falls. Sparta wins the war. The democracy collapses. In its place, a brutal oligarchy called the 30 Tyrants takes power. Led by Critias, another former student of Socrates, they execute hundreds of citizens, seize property, and rule through fear. Socrates is horrified. Though he taught Critias to seek truth, the man has become a monster. When ordered to arrest an innocent man, Socrates refuses. I will obey the law, but not injustice, he says. It nearly costs him his life. After the tyrants fall, democracy is restored, but the damage is done. Socrates is now linked in the public mind to those who betrayed the city. You see him now older, white-bearded, slower of step, still barefoot, still wandering, still asking the same questions in awe. Agra, what is justice? What is piety? What is the good? But the city is changing. His questions no longer provoke amusement, they provoke resentment. The youth still follow him, but the adults, especially the powerful, have grown tired. Socrates has not changed. But Athens has . And soon, it will put him on trial. Athens. At twilight, 399 BCE draws near. You walk through Athens in the soft light of evening. It's a quieter city now, smaller, humbler, worn. The scars of war linger like faded bruises. Blackened stones where buildings once stood, empty homes where families never returned. Once, Athens had been the crown of Greece. Now it feels like a philosopher past his prime, reflective, uncertain. Still talking, but less sure who's listening. And yet, Socrates is still here, still wandering the agora, still asking questions. But the questions that once sparked thought are now seen as flames threatening to burn the city down. His influence, his students, his stubborn refusal to bow, these have become liabilities. The shadow of his trial doesn't fall all at once. It builds slowly, in gossip, in fear, in betrayal. This is the chapter where Socrates' enemies multiply, and his fate begins to take shape. You pass a row of weathered columns. A young boy sweeps dust from a shopfront. His father tightens his sandals with worn fingers. These people once believed in glory. Now they settle for peace. The war with Sparta is over. It ended in bitter defeat. And in that void of leadership and identity, Athenians cling to old values, stability, tradition, obedience. But Socrates never learned how to perform loyalty for show. The man you see standing in the marketplace isn't defeated. He's older now, yes. His beard is streaked with white. his shoulders less upright. But his eyes, those strange, almost bulging eyes, still burn with curiosity. He still asks questions with that same calm confidence. And it's that confidence that disturbs people now. Athens is fragile. And to many, confidence looks like defiance. The first signs of danger are small. Rumors, whispered warnings, leads our sons to question us. He taught Critias. You remember Critias, don't you? And Alcibiades, wasn't he with Socrates all the time before he defected? Socrates hears these things. He always hears. But he doesn't change. One afternoon, you're walking beside him, through the Stoa. A merchant pulls his son away when Socrates approaches. Another citizen scowls, mutters something about impiety. Socrates just shrugs. When people fear questions, they call them treason. But even his students are uneasy. Plato warns him, perhaps you should speak less in public. Write your thoughts. Avoid the assembly. Socrates smiles. Avoid the city, Plato? Why not also avoid truth? Ironically, it isn't politicians or priests who first push Socrates toward trial. It's comedians. Aristophanes, in his play The Clouds, paints a caricature. Socrates as a babbling madman suspended in a basket, staring at the sky, teaching foolish boys to deny the gods and make weak arguments appear strong. You sit in the theater of Dionysus and watch it. The crowd laughs wildly as Socrates argues that Zeus doesn't exist, that thunder is just flatulence from clouds. They howl as he teaches a student to beat his father. You glance over at the real Socrates. In the crowd he watches silently, eyes twinkling. It is better to be laughed at for speaking truth, he says later, than to be applauded for flattery. But the damage is done. Most in the audience don't know Aristophanes is exaggerating. Or if they do, they don't care. The seeds of misunderstanding are sown. Socrates never teaches in a classroom. He doesn't assign readings. He doesn't charge a fee. He teaches by walking, talking, asking. But his students, they're the brightest, and the boldest, and the most dangerous. Alcibiades, his on-again, off-again student, seduced half of Athens, then betrayed it to Sparta, then Persia, then back again. Critias, one of the 30 tyrants, oversaw executions and oppression during the oligarchic coup. Socrates never told them to betray the city, but his influence is undeniable. His former students do not quote the gods, they quote him, and the city remembers. Even the ones he teaches now, they're not farmers or builders or priests. They're the sons of generals. They're the heirs of democracy. They're supposed to lead Athens. And Socrates is filling their heads with questions, not loyalty. It's important to ask, what was it, exactly, that Socrates taught that made him dangerous? He never gave answers. That's what made him different. But his method was subversive. He asked, what is justice? Is it merely obeying the law? If so, what if the law is unjust? What is piety? Is it simply following rituals? Or must it be sincere? Is majority rule always wise? Or can many be wrong, and one be right? These questions, posed to young minds, can shake the pillars of society, and Socrates refuses to apologize for asking them. Now we arrive in the winter of 400 BCE. Socrates is 70 years old. He walks a little slower. His circle of students is smaller, but more devoted than ever. And then, it comes. A man named Meletus files formal charges. Two others, Anytus, a powerful politician, and Lycon, a rhetorician, support him. Accusation is read in public. Socrates is guilty of impiety, in that he does not recognize the gods of the city and of corrupting the youth. It's surreal. This man who's never led a rebellion, never taken money for teachings, never told anyone to disobey the law, is being accused of crimes against the soul of the city. And yet, perhaps not surprising, He has always been a thorn. And now, Athens wants peace. It wants simplicity. It wants to believe in itself again. Socrates represents everything Athens wants to forget. His students are outraged. Plato begs him to mount a serious defense. Xenophon suggests exile, but Socrates refuses to beg. He doesn't run. He won't lie. If I've corrupted the youth, let them speak against me. If I do not believe in the gods, let someone say what God I've denied. I've lived as I've spoken. That, to me, is justice. Some call this pride. Others, principled you walk with him through the agora the day before the trial. He stops before a statue of Athena and closes his eyes. Then he says softly, I fear only one thing dying, having never lived as I believed. That evening, Athens feels stiller than usual. The streets are quiet. The Acropolis glows in moonlight. You sit with Socrates beneath an old fig tree, listening to the wind through the leaves. He speaks. They accuse me of corrupting the youth. But have they shown one person who was worse for knowing me? You ask him if he regrets anything. He chuckles. I regret I will not have time to ask more questions. That is all. He looks up at the stars. There are two possibilities. Death is either a dreamless sleep or a journey to another place. If it is sleep, then it is rest. If it is a journey, then perhaps I shall speak with Homer, with Orpheus, with Pythagoras. Would that not be divine? You say nothing. He turns to you, smiles gently. Do not mourn me. The soul that questions is never truly silenced. The trial is coming. In a city still unsure of what it believes in, it is about to put its greatest questioner on trial, not just for his influence, but for what he represents, a challenge to certainty. Athens, spring of 399 BCE. You wake up to the sound of distant sandals scuffing limestone. The sky is pale and almost too serene, as if nature itself is holding its breath. It is the morning of the trial, and something feels wrong. The agora is unusually quiet, no musicians, no laughter from the wine cellars. Even the vendors speak in hushed tones. A boy chases a stray dog past the edge of the stoa, and a guard shoos him away. Everything feels staged, like Athens has built itself into a theater for one final performance. At the center of it all is a man walking toward the courthouse calmly. Slowly, his robe stirring faintly in the breeze. Socrates. He carries nothing. No scroll, no lawyer, no fear, just the same serenity he wore in battle. You follow him into the great open-air courtroom, the Helia, where more than 500 jurors have already gathered. Some chew olives. Some murmur behind hands. Some stare at the man in the center, as if willing him to vanish. Asterisk. But Socrates does not flinch under their eyes. He seems curious about them, studying them like students who do not yet know they are in class. The charges are already public. Impiety, failing to recognize the gods of the city, introducing new divinities, mysterious spiritual voices that the city fears, corrupting the youth, leading the next generation to question tradition, law, even the gods. You listen as Melodus, a young zealous accuser, steps forward. He barely looks at Socrates as he begins. Men of Athens, he says, this man does not believe in the gods recognized by the state. He has introduced strange new spiritual practices. He seduces our youth with clever arguments, turning them against their families, against our laws. He is an enemy of Athens. The crowd shifts, not because of the words they've heard them before, but because they fear what will follow if those words go unpunished. Then Socrates steps forward. No scroll, no polished speech, just the same voice he's used in the streets of the Agora for decades. I know not how you, men of Athens, have been affected by my accusers. But for my part, I was almost carried away by them They spoke so convincingly. And yet, all they said was false. He pauses, as if giving the jury time to digest not just his words, but his presence. I am not a sophist. I do not teach for money. I have never claimed wisdom. If I am wise at all, it is only in knowing that I know nothing. He walks slowly before the panel, hands behind his back. You say I corrupt the youth. Let me ask, who improves them? Do you? Do the poets? The politicians? The parents? And if I alone corrupt them, why is there not a single person who stands here today to say, Socrates made me worse? And in piety? I speak of divine signs. I listen to a voice that guides me away from wrongdoing. Is that not a form of piety? Just because I do not name the gods as you do, does that make me envious? His voice remains steady, almost intimate. If my actions have been unlawful, they were not deliberate. And if they were not deliberate, then teach me. Do not condemn. Me. A few in the crowd nod. More remain still. But Socrates does not plead. He does not flatter. I would rather die having spoken truth than live having silenced it. Now comes Meletus' rebuttal, but Socrates does not wait. Turns directly to his accuser. Tell me, Meletus, do I believe in gods? No, you believe in no gods at all. Strange, Socrates says. Do I not speak of spirits and divine signs? Are spirits not related to gods? Meletus falters. The crowd chuckles. Then by your own admission, I believe in some. Form of divine beings. Your accusation collapses. He doesn't stop there. Do horses improve by chance? Or by trainers? By trainers, Meletus replies. Then why would the youth of Athens improve by accident? Why assume that I, alone among men, corrupt them? He keeps turning Meletus' words back on themselves, like a mirror showing distortion. But it's not enough. This isn't a trial about logic. It's about fear, memory, identity. And Socrates has been questioning all three for decades. The 501 jurors file out in small groups. Each holds 2 pebbles, 1 white, 1 black. White means not guilty. Black means guilty. You wait in silence as they drop the pebbles into 2 urns. 1 for conviction, 1 for acquittal. When they return, a court official counts them aloud. That you hold your breath. The result. Guilty. By a slim margin, perhaps 30 votes. You can't tell if Socrates even blinked. He folds his arms and bows his head briefly, as if accepting a necessary truth. Now comes the penalty phase. According to Athenian law, the convicted man can suggest his own sentence. Meletus demands death. Socrates could suggest exile, silence, a hefty fine. Instead, he clears his throat and says, what is a just penalty for a man who spent his life improving your souls, asking you to care for virtue more than wealth? If I must name a just reward, then I say this: meals for life at the Prytaneum. The audience gasps. Some jeer. The Prytaneum is where Olympic champions and national heroes are honored. Free meals for life is a reward, not a punishment. I say this not to mock you, he adds, but because I believe it. I have never ceased to serve Athens. His friends beg him to change course. Plato, seated in the back, nearly rises. But Socrates gestures him to stay seated. If you expected me to beg for mercy, you do not know me. The jurors vote again. This time, the verdict is overwhelming. Death. The sentence is official. Socrates is to be executed by drinking hemlock, but there's a delay due to a religious festival. No executions can occur until the sacred ship to Delos returns. So Socrates is taken to prison. Alive, for now. As he walks past you, he leans in and says, now the real conversation begins. The courtroom empties slowly. Some cry. Others mutter about justice. A few celebrate, but most are silent. You catch a few voices as you Walk. He was too clever for his own good. He made the youth ungrateful. Maybe he just asked one question too many. You pass Plato. Eyes narrowed, fists clenched. They have killed philosophy. Whispers, not just the man. But you remember Socrates' words, the unexamined life is not worth living. And you realize the city may silence his voice, but not his question. The stone walls are cool to the touch. You run your fingers over them as you enter. The corridors are quiet. Not from fear, but reverence. This is not the cell of an outlaw or a thief. It's a tomb in waiting. A sanctuary for a philosopher who, in a matter of hours, will no longer walk among the living. You're not alone. Socrates' followers are already there. Crito, pacing the corner. Apollodorus, red-eyed and trembling. Plato, seated on a low stool, silent, scribbling something with shaking hands. His face is young, but his eyes are ancient. And then there is Socrates himself, seated calmly, cross-legged on a rough blanket, his robe modest. His gaze focused not on anyone, not on the walls, but somewhere beyond. He looks like he's already halfway out of his body. Asterisk, he sees you, and he smiles. You've come to witness the death of a man, he says, but I hope you leave having witnessed something greater, the life of the soul. The room should feel heavy, but it doesn't. It feels illuminated, not by light, but by the man in its center. Socrates is speaking, not about death, but about music. I've begun composing hymns to Apollo, he says to the others. Strange, isn't it? I never cared for music before, but now it seems fitting. Crito, frustrated, blurts out, Why do you speak of songs? We should be preparing to escape. The guards are ready. The path is clear. You can still live. Socrates turns to him gently. And where would I live, Crito? In a city that does not know me, among strangers who fear questions more than injustice. Crito is near tears. You owe it to us, to Athens, to philosophy. Socrates looks up. No, I owe it to truth. As the hours pass, the prison cell becomes a classroom. Socrates speaks as he always has, not as a man condemning ignorance, but as a guide gently peeling away illusions. He speaks of the soul. Do not think of me as dying. I am merely shedding this cloak of flesh. What is death but a separation? The soul from the body freed at last. Apollodorus sobs. Plato clenches his jaw. Socrates goes on. Many fear death because they believe it is the end. I do not. I think it is a return, a purification. He turns to you. If your body were a cage and your mind its prisoner, would you not rejoice when the door opened? You nod slowly, and for a moment, death does not seem like an ending, but a continuation. Late in the day, the door creaks. Open. A figure enters quietly. A guard. He carries a small wooden cup. Inside, a thick, dark green liquid conium maculatum. Hemlock. The man does not speak. He sets the cup down and lowers his eyes, ashamed. Socrates thanks him. He lifts the cup and studies it. Strange that so small a thing can silence a lifetime of breath. No one speaks. No one moves. I do not drink in despair. He says, I drink because I lived by the law, and I must die by it. He looks around the room one last time. I leave you not with answers, but with the courage to keep asking. He drinks. Slowly, deliberately. He lies down. My legs are going numb, he says, almost with curiosity. It begins from the feet and climbs. Crito kneels beside him. Tell me, master, what are you feeling? Peace. A quiet I have never known. Then, a whisper. Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. See that it is paid. No one understands. Not at first. Asclepius, the god of healing, Why would Socrates thank a god of healing? In death? Then you realize Socrates saw life as an illness, a beautiful, painful affliction of the soul. Death, then, was the cure. The release. His chest rises once more. Then falls, and does not rise again. You exit the prison with the others. The air outside feels different. Like the sky has lowered itself. The agora is unusually still. No singers, no debates. Just murmurs. News spreads. Socrates is dead. Some celebrate. Good riddance to the corrupter of youth. Others mourn. They have executed wisdom itself. But most stay silent. You return to the spot where you first met him, the stone where he asked you, "What is justice?" You sit, and you listen, not to his voice, but to his echo, to the questions he planted that now bloom within you. In the years that follow, his name will become legend. Plato will write his dialogues, ensuring that Socrates' thoughts outlive marble and empire. Xenophon will recall his manner, his discipline, his warmth. Others will follow. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Descartes, Kierkegaard, all drawn by that one flame he lit, the love of truth. They killed his body, but they made him immortal. Socrates did not die in shame. He died exactly as he lived, without fear, without compromise, without illusion, and in doing so, he became something even greater than a philosopher. He became a mirror, one we all still look into centuries later asking, "Am I living a life worth examining?" Athens, early morning. Days after the execution, the sun still rises over Athens. The olive trees still sway. The market still opens. But the city feels quieter, not just in sound, but in soul. You step into the agora expecting the usual chorus, vendors shouting, politicians debating, philosophers drawing circles in the dirt with their staffs. Instead, there's something strange in the air, an unspoken grief. No one mentions his name, not aloud, but Socrates is everywhere. The spot where Socrates used to stand is now just a patch of worn stone. Passers-by glance at it, then quickly look away as though it accuses them. A group of younger men lingers nearby, but they do not speak. One of them, tall, barefoot, touches the ground where Socrates once stood. His friend murmurs, almost inaudibly. He would have said something about this silence. The older Athenians keep their heads down now, not because they've changed their minds, but because they no longer trust themselves. The man they thought was dangerous turned out to be their last connection to honest thought. You pass a pottery vendor whispering to his wife. He asked too many questions, that one, but maybe we needed them. Even the birds seem quieter today. The echoes of doubt at first. The death was praised by some. Meletus, the prosecutor, was seen, smiling in the marketplace. A few aristocrats nodded with satisfaction. Order has been restored, they said. The gadfly is gone. But within days, something shifted. A young man is overheard asking, if truth can be killed, was it ever truth at all? A playwright drafts a tragedy titled The Trial of the Just Man. In it, a chorus of masked judges sentences a nameless figure, only to realize their own mouths have been sewn shut by the gods. The play is banned before it reaches the stage. At night, graffiti begins to appear across the stone walls of the city. He drank hemlock. We swallowed lies. Virtue never needed a defense until now. The people begin to ask themselves what they never dared ask before. Were we wrong? Plato is gone. He left the city shortly after the funeral. Some say he's in Aegina. Others say in Megara. But before he left, he gathered every note, every memory, every conversation with Socrates, and swore he'd preserve them. They can kill the body, he said, but not the logos. Crito, older and weary, visits Socrates' grave every dawn. He kneels. He weeps. He talks to the earth. You called me your friend, but I failed you. I should have dragged you from that prison. He brings him olives, as if the dead still hunger for peace. Apollodorus disappears into mourning. You hear rumors he's writing poetry no one will ever read. His grief is volcanic, beautiful, and devastating. But not all of Socrates' students disappear. Some stay. One begins to teach in the gymnasium. His name is Antisthenes, and he tells his listeners, live simply, seek virtue. Let pain be your teacher. Another Aristippus sails for Cyrene, preaching that pleasure, rightly pursued, is the highest good. You realize something profound. Socrates is multiplying. Not in body, but in soul. Then comes the shift. It starts in the assembly. Quiet. At first, a senator, gray-bearded and trembling, stands to speak. Let it be known, I voted for his death. I thought him dangerous, but my dreams are haunted. I see his eyes. I hear his questions. I no longer sleep. The chamber murmurs. Another voice. We did not kill a man. We killed a mirror. Soon the rumors twist. Melodus flees the city. Anytus, another accuser, is found dead. Some say by suicide. Others say by poison. The people begin to speak of curses, divine punishment. Athenian pride gives way to shame. Within a year, the assembly proposes a motion. All future executions of philosophers must require a unanimous vote by all 10 tribes. Too little, too late. But it's the city's first whisper of repentance. Philosophy is no longer practiced in the agora. It moves to gardens, back rooms, hilltops. In the shadow of Socrates' death, young minds become cautious, but also more courageous. They know what truth costs now. They saw the receipt. You overhear one youth whisper to another, let them fear our questions now. They killed a man to avoid answering. One day, you visit the old prison cell. It's empty now, but you imagine it, the cup, the sandals, the final breath. You hear the echo of his voice. The unexamined life is not worth living. You close your eyes. You speak the words aloud, not as a memory, but as a vow. Athens did not go quiet after Socrates. It went deeper. The silence was not absence, was absorption. A city once loud with certainty, now whispered with questions. And those questions, like seeds, began to sprout, because Socrates did not vanish. He was buried in thought, and thought, like fire, always finds a way to rise. Walk along a shaded path lined with wild thyme and low olive trees. The wind carries not the songs of the agora, but something more solemn. Pages turning, pens scratching, questions whispered into the silence. Ahead, a man sits beneath a tree with a scroll on his lap and a stylus in his hand. He doesn't look. Up, he is writing. Again, he has written almost every day since Socrates died. That man is Plato, and this is not grief. This is war. They tried to silence Socrates with poison. What they didn't count on was Plato. You approach the man who once sat silently at his teacher's side. Now, he is the voice keeper, the interpreter, the flame bearer. He once believed the world could be just, that men could be wise, that cities could be ruled by reason. Now, he's not so sure. But what he is sure of is this: Socrates cannot be forgotten. Plato writes not in anger, but in awe. Not to avenge, but to remember. But his memory isn't nostalgic. It's precise, surgical. He doesn't write treatises. He writes dialogues. Why? Because Socrates never preached. He provoked. He didn't deliver sermons. He disarmed certainty. He didn't teach answers. He exposed illusions. Plato captures that rhythm. The pauses, the traps, the relentless humility. In Euthyphro, Socrates debates piety on the way to his indictment. In Apology, we hear his defiance before the court. In Crito, we see him reject escape. In Phaedo, we sit with him in his final moments. You don't just read about Socrates. You relive him. And Plato makes sure of it. As long as there is language, you will hear him. Plato once told a friend. He wasn't wrong. Years pass. Plato returns to Athens, not to the Agora, but just outside the city, where an old gymnasium lies in ruins. It was once dedicated to a forgotten hero named Academus. Plato rebuilds it not as a monument, but as a movement. The academy is born. There are no marble gates, no guards, no slogans, not just thinkers, wanderers, questioners. He trains minds, not with lectures, but with questions. Each student learns to examine everything, their beliefs, their politics, even their own souls. They come to learn, but leave. Unlearning. This isn't a school. It's a sanctuary of doubt. And Plato? He is the high priest of curiosity. Plato does not worship Socrates. He honors him by evolving beyond him. While Socrates destroyed false certainty, Plato tries to build something new in its place. He imagines the theory of forms perfect, abstract, essences beyond the physical world. Justice, beauty, goodness, not just ideas, but eternal truths. You watch him sketch diagrams in the dirt. A circle, a ladder, a line. He explains the divided line, a metaphor for how we climb from illusion to understanding. Then comes the allegory of the cave. You've heard it, of course. Everyone has. Humans, he says, are prisoners in a cave, mistaking shadows for reality. One man escapes, sees the sun, understands truth. He returns to free the others. They mock him. They kill him. Sound familiar? But Plato doesn't stop at theory. He believes philosophy must serve the city. He dreams of a ruler not corrupted by greed or ego, a philosopher king. And so, when invited to Sicily to advise young Dionysius II of Syracuse, Plato goes. He sees potential. Instead, he finds arrogance, paranoia, violence. He tries to teach. They mock him. He criticizes the court. They imprison him. A friend buys his freedom. Plato returns to Athens, humiliated but wiser. Philosophy does not belong in palaces. He tells his students, it belongs in the soul. You would think Plato mellowed with age. He didn't. If anything, he became more relentless. His later works, the Times, the laws grow more complex, more ambitious. He tries to create blueprints for a just city, for moral education, for divine harmony. His tone grows firmer, more urgent. He knows time is running out, not just for him, but for truth itself. He writes until the day he dies. Some say he passed away during a wedding feast. Others say he died writing, mid-sentence. Both feel correct. Today, the academy still stands, not as stone, but as spirit. Every time someone asks a question they're not supposed to ask, every time a student challenges a teacher, every time a mind refuses to kneel to dogma, Plato is there, and Socrates lives again. You walk back through the olive grove where you first saw him. The wind stirs. The leaves whisper. Somewhere, a scroll flutters open, and in ink across time, you hear it again. The unexamined life is not worth living. But the examined life? It's worth everything. The plains of Asia Minor years after the execution of Socrates, you smell dust, iron, sweat. The clatter of armor echoes across the stony hills. A Spartan camp, hardened by war, sleeps fitfully beneath a cold moon. And by one of the fires, lit low, sits a man not sharpening a blade but writing. He is Xenophon, a general, an exile, a survivor, and once a student of Socrates. Xenophon didn't wear a himation and sandals. He wore bronze and carried a spear. You watch him command troops with stern resolve. He doesn't quote Plato. He doesn't speak in riddles. He makes decisions quickly, men's lives hang on them. But you notice something else too. When chaos erupts, when morale falters, he pauses, just for a moment, and in that breath of stillness, he remembers a voice. Calm, unshakable. Socrates. Not in the form of theory, but of character. What did Socrates teach him? Stand firm in the storm. Speak plainly. Question bravely. Live with virtue, especially when virtue costs you something. Xenophon would become famous for leading 10,000 Greek mercenaries across hostile Persian territory, hundreds of miles from home. They had no leader, no map, just a shattered army surrounded by enemies deep in foreign land. It was Xenophon who rose. He organized, he negotiated, he fought, he endured. But behind every strategy, a principle whispered through him. The good man is the one who knows himself, even in danger. He didn't call it philosophy. He called it survival with integrity. But Socrates was there, in every hard choice, every disciplined march, every silent prayer for daylight. Years later, when the blood dries and the swords dull, Xenophon sits under an Attic fig tree and begins to write, not war stories, but memories, memorabilia. He calls it a book about Socrates, but not the Socrates of Plato's soaring metaphysics. No, his Socrates is different. He gives us the man who talked to stonemasons about honesty, who advised fathers on raising good sons, who asked the baker how to live rightly, not how to define form, but how to be decent. Socrates, in Xenophon's eyes, was a practical philosopher, a teacher of courage, temperance, and justice. In real life, not just in theory. You read Xenophon's version and feel a more grounded presence. Less divine, more human. This Socrates laughs. He teases. He tells a young man to clean his room before discussing statcraft. He praises discipline, moderation, and honest work. Some will say Xenophon misunderstood him. Maybe. Others will say, he gave us the side of Socrates we could live by. Not just think about. Maybe. But it doesn't matter. Because this Socrates matters too. The one who inspired a soldier not to conquer, but to choose virtue over victory. Part of Xenophon's reason for writing was simple: to defend Socrates' name. He was horrified when he heard about the trial. The poison, the silence. He hadn't been there. He had been in Asia, fighting wars, but he never forgave himself. So in his writings, he wages a different kind of war. He dismantles the accusations. Socrates did not deny the gods. He writes, he did not corrupt the youth. He taught them to be better men. Xenophon doesn't make Socrates a martyr. He makes him a role model. Years pass. The wars end. Athens changes. Xenophon, older now, walks through the same agora he once knew. It is quieter. The students speak of Plato and ideal forms now. He doesn't argue. He nods. He respects Plato, but he sees a different Socrates in his mind's eye. Not on trial, not drinking hemlock, but standing in the street, talking to a farmer about fairness, asking a soldier how he trains his will, laughing with a child who asks, what is courage? He lays a single olive branch near the old stone where Socrates used to sit. You taught me how to think, he murmurs, but more than that, you taught me how to choose. He walks away. A soldier, yes, but a philosopher in his own right. A dim study in Alexandria. Generations after Socrates' death, the candle flickers. You lean over a stack of scrolls, their parchment cracked with time. One scroll reads, the sayings of Socrates. Another, the death of the sage. But something is strange. None of these voices sound quite the same. One calls him a moral hero. Another calls him a destroyer of illusions. A third calls him dangerous. You glance down again. It's all Socrates. And yet, it isn't the man who walked barefoot through the agora. The man who claimed to know nothing has now become 1,000 things to 1,000 thinkers. What happened? Socrates didn't leave a school. He left a spark. And now, the fire has spread. The moment Socrates drank the hemlock, his memory became contested ground. His students didn't all agree on what he stood for. Plato built dialogues. Xenophon wrote memoirs. Others, Antisthenes, Aristippus, Euclides, took pieces of him and ran in opposite directions. And from their divergence, the world's first great philosophical branches were born. You're not looking at one legacy. You're looking at an explosion. You walk down a filthy alley in Athens. You almost miss him half naked, sitting in a broken barrel. Diogenes, a man so feared and admired that Alexander the Great once stood before him, asking what he desired. "Stand out of my sunlight," Diogenes replied. He called himself a dog. He barked at hypocrisy. He defecated in public to prove a point. His teacher, Antisthenes, one of Socrates' closest students, preached a life of virtue, stripped of wealth, fame, and pretense. But Diogenes? He pushed that to the limit. To him, Socrates was not a gentle questioner. He was the wrecking ball of illusion. He saw Plato's academy and laughed. You built a temple to empty words. The cynics believed Socrates taught not just how to live, but how to live against the world. You step into the colonnade of the Stoa Athens painted porch. A man named Zeno teaches calmly, deliberately. His robes are modest, his voice serene. He tells his followers that Socrates was not a mad rebel. He was the sage. He was what every human should strive to become. Unshaken, moral, rational, free from fear and passion. The Stoics took Socratic endurance and made it divine. Where the cynics renounced society, the Stoics engaged with it calmly, ethically, and with reason at the helm. To them, Socrates' death wasn't a tragedy. It was the triumph of the soul over the body. You hear Epictetus say, Socrates did not flee death. He met it as a free man should. But not all saw Socrates as a moralist. In a garden school, centuries later, a different kind of follower emerges. The skeptics, led by men like Pyrrho and later Sextus Empiricus, saw Socrates as something else entirely, not a sage, a question. Socrates didn't preach truth. He destroyed it. I know that I know nothing, he said, and the skeptics built a worldview from that void. They suspended judgment on everything: gods, ethics, logic, even language. To them, Socrates was not a moral example, but an invitation to let go. No belief is certain. No truth is final. Only peace is real, and peace lies in not knowing. You pass a shaded grove where laughter echoes and wine flows. The Epicureans dwell here, disciples of Epicurus. They seek simple pleasures, friendship, and the quiet life. They do not revere Socrates like the others. They find his obsession with death unsettling, his endless questioning exhausting. And yet, they respect him. They admire his independence, his calm in court, his refusal to flatter tyrants. But they do not follow him. To them, Socrates touched the truth and then drowned in it, but not all remember him with admiration. Even in his lifetime, Socrates had enemies. Aristophanes, the comic playwright, mocked him in the clouds, depicting him as a babbling sophist, a corrupter. Of youth, a man with his head in the sky and his feet nowhere. To many, Socrates' legacy seemed dangerous. He questioned too much. He inspired Plato, and Plato inspired revolution. The 30 tyrants, the execution of generals, the fall of the old order. Some whispered, this is what happens when philosophers meddle in politics. Even now, some say Socrates deserved his fate. You open scroll after scroll. One says Socrates was divine, another delusional. One says he taught virtue, another says he taught doubt. You realize they're all right. Because Socrates didn't give answers. He gave mirrors. Everyone who studied him saw a different reflection. The cynic saw rebellion. The stoic saw virtue. The skeptic saw silence. The Epicurean saw restraint. The critic saw danger. And through it all, Socrates never wrote a word. Because he knew the real philosopher doesn't build temples. He builds questioners. You sit back, the last scroll still in hand. You understand now. Socrates didn't die in 399 BCE. He multiplied. His death created a vacuum. And into that vacuum poured courage, contradiction, curiosity, and chaos. 1,000 voices, 1,000 minds, all tracing themselves back to one old man who asked, "What is justice?" and waited not for your answer, but for your honesty. A candlelit Roman catacomb. 2nd century CE, the air is damp. You run your fingers along the stone walls of a hidden chapel. The faint scent of oil lamps and ancient prayer lingers in the cracks. Around you, a dozen men and women huddle in silence, whispering psalms, awaiting dawn or arrest. One man holds a scroll, carefully unrolling it. It's not a gospel. It's Phaedo Plato's account of Socrates' final moments. You meet his eyes. He smiles gently. He died for the truth. So shall I? And in that moment, something dawns on you. Socrates and Christ never met. But their shadows are merging in this place of persecution. You sit with the thought. Two men, executed by the state, not for violence, not for rebellion, but for ideas. One wandered Athens barefoot, questioning the nature of justice. The other walked Galilee in sandals, teaching mercy and love. Socrates corrupted the youth, they said. Jesus blasphemed, they claimed. And both stood before their accusers calm, defiant, unwavering. Neither begged for mercy, neither cursed their killers. Both drank the cup placed before them. For early Christians, this was no coincidence. Socrates became the prototype of the martyr. Christ, the fulfillment of the ideal. You step into the study of Justin Martyr, a Roman philosopher turned Christian. The man who once studied Plato now wears a simple cloak, writing by torchlight. He doesn't discard Socrates, he embraces him. Socrates lived by the Logos, he writes, and the Logos is Christ. To Justin and others like him, Socrates was a pagan saint, one who followed reason, who obeyed conscience, who suffered for truth. He was not a Christian in name, but in spirit. To call Socrates one of us gave Christianity roots in the intellectual soil of the Greco-Roman world. It was a bold claim, but it worked. In Greek philosophy, logos meant reason, order, the rational force behind the cosmos. Socrates believed in listening to his inner voice, his daemonion, and obeying a moral order higher than the state. Christians took this and transformed it. To them, the logos was not abstract, it was incarnate. In the beginning was the Word, writes John, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Suddenly, Socratic moral conscience and Christian divine truth pointed to the same thing. The soul's compass and heaven's will aligned. Socrates obeyed reason. Christ embodied it. In Phaedo, Socrates speaks calmly about death. He does not fear it. He welcomes it as the soul's release. To the early Christians, this sounded familiar. The soul is eternal. The body is a prison. Virtue matters more than survival. When Socrates drank the hemlock, it was not suicide. It was sacrifice. Just as Christ's crucifixion was not defeat, but victory, Socrates died for the examined life. Christ died to redeem life. Two deaths, both echoing the same eternal rhythm, truth above all else. But not everyone in the growing church agreed. Some bishops and theologians feared Socrates. He questioned the gods. He honored reason over revelation. He never spoke of grace, resurrection, or divine forgiveness. And worse, his name was still beloved in pagan academies. A philosopher? Yes. A prophet? Dangerous. By the time Christianity became the Roman Empire's official religion, the Church had a choice to make: distance itself from pagan roots, or adopt and reinterpret them. The result was complicated. Some burned the writings. Others preserved them in monasteries. But the imprint of Socrates never truly faded. He returned to the catacombs. The Christian who read Phaedo now prepares to face the arena. He doesn't tremble. He prays. He smiles. Socrates taught me not to fear death, he says. Christ taught me to love through it. He walks forward, unchained. And as you watch, you realize something startling. Socrates gave the West the language of conscience. Christ gave it the promise of salvation. One said, "Know thyself." The other said, "Deny thyself." Yet somehow, both meant, live in truth. You carry their words with you. Socrates, what is the good life? Jesus, what does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? In different languages, in different centuries, they each reached for the same light. Not comfort, not conquest, but truth. And that truth, once planted in the soul, cannot be uprooted, even by the state, even by the sword. Baghdad, 9th century CE. House of Wisdom. You walk through a sprawling courtyard surrounded by domes and marble columns. The sun filters through latticed windows, casting geometric shadows over manuscripts, and murmuring scholars dot, this is not Athens. It's Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic Golden Age. And here, in the great Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, a strange thing is happening. The words of a long-dead Athenian are being reborn in Arabic. Socrates, who wrote nothing in his life, is now being read, debated, and revered by a new world. Arabic scribes bend over scrolls, translating Greek into Syriac, then Syriac into Arabic. Words like virtue, soul, justice, daemonion are transformed. Socrates becomes Socrates, not merely a name but a symbol, a guide, a kind of holy man. For Islamic philosophers, this wasn't a contradiction. In their eyes, truth belongs to no single people. If Socrates spoke truth, he must have touched something divine. You enter a small study chamber lit by oil lamps. A scholar with calm eyes and a trimmed beard sits before stacks of parchment. His name is Al-Kindi, a philosopher of the Arabs. He reveres Aristotle, but he speaks of Socrates with deeper affection. Socrates, he writes, is the purifier of the soul. He does not build systems, he frees hearts. To Al-Kindi, Socrates wasn't just a thinker. He was a physician of the inner world, a man who asked questions not to confuse, but to heal. He made philosophy moral, not just intellectual. Later, you visit the gardens of Al-Farabi, the great logician and political theorist. He walks in silence, then turns to you. Socrates, he says, was the bridge between myth and reason. He gave us the path to ethical civilization. Farabi believed in the virtuous city, a political utopia led by philosopher kings. His model, Plato's Republic. But who inspired Plato? Socrates. For Farabi, Socrates was the beginning of man, who took wisdom out of the heavens and placed it in human hearts. He saw in Socrates a model of the ideal citizen, one whose obedience to conscience could guide even nations. The scent of frankincense leads you to Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. He's discussing the soul with his students. Medicine, for him, is not just about bones and organs. It is about meaning. And in this search, he often quotes Socrates. Evil comes from ignorance, Ibn Sina writes, echoing Socrates. To know is to heal. He studies Plato and Aristotle, but it is Socrates who taught him that the examined life is the cured life. Ibn Sina's idea of nafs, the soul, owes as much to Greek thought as it does to Islamic scripture. Socrates, in this world, is a spiritual ancestor. You pass through a marketplace and into a quiet zavia, A Sufi lodge. Inside, dervishes swirl in rhythm to flute and drum. A sheik offers tea and a parable. There was once a man who heard a voice within. He followed it until it led him to silence. And in that silence, he met the truth. You recognize the story. It's not from the Quran. It's not from Hadith. It's Socrates. The Sufis never declared him a saint, but they embraced his essence. Inner conscience, his daemonion, resembled their fitra, the innate, God-given awareness. Self-knowledge was a path to God. Detachment from wealth, comfort, and ego mirrored the cynics, but also Islamic asceticism. In the Sufi view, Socrates was not just a philosopher. He was a lover of the real. Not far from Baghdad, a century later, Al-Ghazali writes by candlelight. He has read the Greeks. He understands Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. He's torn. Reason, he says, is a noble tool, but it cannot replace revelation. He respects Socrates, but he fears where reason alone might lead. Still, Ghazali credits him for ethics, for moral clarity, and for humility before the divine. Even his caution carries respect. Socrates to Ghazali is a noble seeker, but one who lacked the final answer only prophecy could give. You sit alone in the shade of a palm tree, the wind rustling the pages of an Arabic manuscript. You reflect. Why did a Muslim world, so grounded in the Quran, embrace a pagan Athenian? Because Socrates obeyed his conscience above authority, trusted reason but remained humble, sought truth at all cost, accepted death for what he believed, aspired to virtue, not power, and because Islam, at its height, was a civilization of intellect. It did not fear the past. It studied it, translated it, and transformed it. In Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, Socrates was never just a foreigner. He was family. You stand once more in the great library of Baghdad. It's centuries before the Mongols will burn it to the ground. Centuries before Europe's Renaissance will rediscover what the Muslim world already knew. Here, Socrates lives, not as a footnote, but as a father of thought. A man of no books, no empire, no temples. And yet his voice echoes in the calligraphy of Arabic, the cadence of Persian, and the whispers of the soul. A candlelit scriptorium in a Benedictine monastery. Northern France, 12th century. You walk slowly through the icy stone corridors of a medieval monastery. Every footstep echoes. The walls are bare. The world is silent. This isn't the buzzing agora. It's not the house of wisdom, but something ancient stirs here too. Inside a small chamber, hunched under a flickering oil lamp, a monk is copying a Latin manuscript by hand. The name Hat. The top of the page is faded but familiar. Socrates. You lean closer. It's a translation filtered through Arabic, then Latin. Socrates, once lost to the West, is being reborn in ink. After the fall of Rome in the 5th century, Europe entered. A long, slow darkness. The libraries burned. The academies vanished. The Greek language, once common among Roman elites, was forgotten. For nearly 600 years, Socrates became little more than a rumor, an ancient name referenced only briefly in passing by church fathers like Augustine and Boethius. His dialogues were not read. His questions were not heard. The medieval church had little interest in pagan inquiry. Faith, not doubt, was the order of the age. In this world, the legacy of Socrates seemed buried for good. But far away, in Islamic lands, his voice endured, and the West would soon come knocking. You travel now to Toledo, Spain, year 1145, a city where Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars coexist, however uneasily. Inside a stone chamber filled with scrolls and strange instruments, a team of translators is hard at work. Among them is Gerard of Cremona, a Christian scholar who came south in search of lost knowledge. In his hands, Arabic copies of Plato, Aristotle, and scattered accounts of Socrates. You watch them translate Greek wisdom from Arabic into Latin. It's not perfect. It's distorted through centuries of commentary and cultural filters. But it's a start. For the first time in centuries, the medieval mind is confronted with Socratic thought indirectly, cautiously, but undeniably. Back in Northern Europe, church scholars begin to study these texts. They're intrigued. But also uneasy. Can the teachings of a pagan philosopher who honored false gods, who questioned authority, who died at the hands of the state, be reconciled with the message of Christ? Some say yes. Socrates obeyed his conscience. He valued virtue above life. He was willing to die for the truth. To them, Socrates is a pagan martyr, a forerunner to Christian saints. Others say no. He trusted reason, not revelation. He never knew the true God. He honored Apollo, not Christ. 2. Them, Socrates is dangerous, a seductive voice who might lead the faithful astray. The debate is fierce. But one thing is certain. Socrates has returned. You walk into a newly built university hall in Paris, 13th century. It is cold, bright, and filled with debate. Students quote Plato and Aristotle. Professors cite the church fathers. Latin echoes off the stone walls. This is the age of scholasticism, a method of education that uses logic and structured debate to explore questions of theology, philosophy, and law. And who better represents this method than Socrates? His use of dialectic, asking questions rather than offering answers, inspires the academic format. His obsession with defining virtue lays the foundation for Christian ethics. His belief in the immortality of the soul resonates with doctrine. To the scholastics, Socrates becomes a pedagogical model, not a saint, not a prophet, but an intellectual father. His method, stripped of his mythology, becomes a cornerstone of the medieval classroom. Among the most brilliant of these scholars is Thomas Aquinas, towering thinker of the 13th century. He studies Aristotle deeply, but is familiar with Socratic logic passed down through Plato and Augustine. To Aquinas, reason is a divine gift, not a rival to faith. He writes, "The philosopher may know some truths by nature, but the theologian knows them by grace." Socrates, then, becomes a man who walked the edge of divine truth. He saw a shadow of it. He understood virtue and the soul, but he lacked the full picture because he had not received revelation. Still, Aquinas respects him. Socrates is evidence that reason can reach toward God, even if it cannot touch him. As universities grow, so too does church anxiety. Reason is powerful and dangerous. The more young minds fall in love with ancient texts, the more questions arise about authority, tradition, even scripture. And so, church officials set boundaries. You may study Socrates, but only under supervision, only through approved translations, only in ways that do not undermine doctrine. Socrates is permitted, but always on a leash. His method, his courage, his independence, they are admired, but not fully embraced. To question too freely is still to risk heresy. And yet, something is happening beneath the surface. In smoky taverns, students whisper about Socratic freedom. In quiet monasteries, monks ponder virtue, not just obedience. Artists begin sketching the death of Socrates on parchment, his cup of hemlock, his calm defiance side by side with the crucifixion of Christ. A parallel is forming, a mythic harmony. Socrates dies for reason. Christ dies for truth. Both reject the world's corruption. Both refuse to yield. In the medieval imagination, a new kind of hero is being born, the martyr of the mind. As the 14th century dawns, change is in the air. The Black Death is coming. The church will fracture. New ideas will rise. But Socrates is already laying the groundwork in the logic of scholastics, in the ethics of Christian philosophers, in the quiet defiance of thinkers who dare to question. The Renaissance is not here yet, but its spirit is stirring in Latin, in ink, in whispered Latin dialogues. Socrates, once lost, has returned not as a destroyer of faith, but as a test of its strength. You stand again in the scriptorium. The monk has finished copying the final line. He sets down his quill. He breathes. Outside, the wind howls. The age is dark, but the mind is not. In this cold, forgotten corner of Europe, a flame is kept alive. The flame of a man who never claimed wisdom, who died for asking questions, who believed the soul was more real than the state. And now, at last, he is being heard again. Florence, Italy, 5th-10th century CE. Dawn of the Renaissance. You find yourself standing on a marble balcony in Florence. Below, the city hums with color and ambition. Painters smear oils onto canvas. Architects measure symmetry in shadows, and philosophers recite ancient Greek under colonnaded courtyards. There's something in the air, something vibrant, electric, divine. After centuries of silence, the ancient world has been unearthed, and at its core, Socrates is no longer a lost voice. He is the heartbeat of the Renaissance. The bells of Santa Maria del Fiore chime as the sun crests the horizon. You stroll through the study halls of Marsilio Ficino, founder of the new Platonic Academy of Florence. The room smells of old parchment, beeswax, and lavender oil. Students gather around, not to memorize scripture, but to debate, what is the soul? Is beauty a form of truth? Can we live well without wisdom? These aren't just theological inquiries. They are Socratic questions reborn in a Christian world hungry for light. A student hands you a freshly bound book, Plato's Dialogues, newly translated from Greek into Latin, accurately, faithfully, completely. For the first time since antiquity, Western Europe reads Socrates in his own words, no longer filtered through Boethius, no longer distorted by war or dogma, no longer a myth, but a man of reason, humor, and unshakable moral clarity. Ficino, under the patronage of the Medici family, calls him the divine philosopher, not because he was perfect, but because he revealed the divine through questions. You pause before a painting. Socrates sits calmly on a stone bench, reaching for the cup of hemlock. Around him, his students weep. His hand does not tremble. To the Renaissance eye, this is not tragedy. This is moral triumph. Socrates becomes a new kind of saint, not canonized by the church, but sanctified by human reason. A martyr for truth. A rebel who refused to betray his conscience, even unto death. To Renaissance thinkers, he's not just a philosopher. He is the model of integrity in a world waking from superstition. Now you're in the presence of Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, the young firebrand of the humanist movement. He delivers his oration on the dignity of man, what some call the manifesto of the Renaissance. God gave man the freedom to choose his place in the cosmos. And in this vision, Socrates is the archetype, a man who chooses virtue over vanity, inquiry over ignorance. A thinker who questions not because he doubts, but because he believes the truth can be found. Pico sees in Socrates the spark of the divine will and human freedom. You journey north to Rotterdam, to a quieter scholar. Desiderius Erasmus, the prince of the humanists. His room is filled with books, candle smoke, and the scent of damp wood. He writes in praise of folly, a satirical masterpiece aimed at church corruption. And who does he invoke as the wise fool? Socrates. He knew nothing, and for that, he was wise. Erasmus admires Socrates not despite his irreverence, but because of it. He is not a threat to Christianity, Erasmus argues. He is its mirror, a man who questioned, suffered, and died for what was right. In Socrates, Erasmus sees a bridge between ancient wisdom and Christian humility. In the quiet hills of France, Michel de Montaigne, father of the essay, reads, Plato, with his feet on the table and a glass of wine in hand, got his motto, "Tu sais G? What do I know?" That single phrase echoes Socrates' core belief. True wisdom lies in admitting ignorance. Montaigne isn't interested in saving souls or building systems. He wants to understand himself. Like Socrates, he writes to ask, not to answer. To explore, not to impose. Through introspection, he discovers a truth both terrifying and beautiful. The mind is its own universe, and Socrates was the first explorer of that inner world. You return to Italy, but now the skies are darker. A Dominican friar named Giordano Bruno preaches of infinite worlds, of divinity beyond the church, of truths too wild for dogma to contain. He cites Plato. He invokes Socrates. To think is to risk. The Inquisition arrests him. He refuses to recant Dot, and in 1600, like Socrates, he dies for what he believes. They burn him alive in Campo di Fiori. You stand in the crowd as flames rise. Bruno's face is calm. He believed, like Socrates, that the search for truth is sacred, even if it leads to the stake. Meanwhile, a revolution is exploding in silence. Gutenberg's pressed out with it. Plato's dialogues spread like wildfire. From Florence to Oxford, young thinkers can read Socrates for the first time, on their own terms. The dialogues are now tools of rebellion, study, and self-discovery. The Socratic method, once passed by word of mouth in the Agora, now floods libraries, salons, and courtrooms. It becomes a weapon of the mind-sharp, humble, and unrelenting. You walk now through the Uffizi, past tapestries and sculptures of gods and men. Among them, you find Socrates cast in bronze, chiseled in marble. He is no longer just a philosopher. He is a symbol of integrity against tyranny, of reason against ignorance, of humanity's capacity to reach towards something eternal. This is the Renaissance's final gift, not just art or science, but the revival of character. And in that revival, Socrates stands tall, not as a relic of the past, but as the first modern man. The wind carries voices from a courtyard debate. You recognize the rhythm. One question, one answer, then a question again. It's Socratic not as mimicry, but as inheritance. The man who never wrote a word has become the most quoted. The man who claimed to know nothing has taught the world how to think. As you walk away from Florence, the city behind you glows like the ember of something just beginning. And Socrates walks beside you, still asking, still listening, not Paris. France, 1784. Midnight, you are sitting in a smoky salon off the Rue Saint-Honor. The room is crowded noblemen without wigs, painters in ink-stained coats, women in embroidered silk. But no one's dancing. No one's toasting. They're arguing. The people have reason. The king has no divine right. And if truth cannot be questioned, is it truth at all? A pamphlet changes hands, a quote is read aloud. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates. Again, always. Here, in the heart of Enlightenment Paris, his name is spoken like a spell. Not of magic, but of freedom. You step into the Jardin du Palais Royal. The statue of Apollo above you looks down in silence. But the real God of this age isn't carved in stone. It's reason. And in this worship of logic, liberty, and inquiry, Socrates is the first prophet. A pagan? Yes, but in the eyes of Enlightenment rebels, he is the man who first showed the world how to think without fear. He is reclaimed, reimagined, not as a dusty Greek, but as a revolutionary spirit. In the candlelit corridors of Ferney, you find Voltaire pacing, furious at tyranny. To him, Socrates is the first victim of religious injustice. Socrates died because he refused to lie to the state. So must we refuse? Voltaire writes essays in his defense, stories that echo the Socratic spirit, characters who choose conscience over comfort. He's not mimicking Socrates. He's channeling him. By contrast, Jean-Jacques Rousseau is silent, solitary, walking the hills of Geneva with his thoughts. He distrusts society. He doesn't want applause. He wants something deeper, moral purity. I hear within me a voice, not from men, but from nature, from reason, from God. That voice, Rousseau says, is the same daemonion that guided Socrates. He doesn't admire Socrates because he was clever. He admires him because he stood alone against Athens, against power, against the crowd. To Rousseau, Socrates is a saint of individual truth. In chilly Edinburgh, philosopher David Hume sips tea and dismantles the pillars of Western thought. Is cause real? Is the self stable? Can anything be known? Like Socrates, Hume is a destroyer of false confidence. He doesn't build new dogmas. He clears space for real inquiry. He writes not in praise of himself, but in the tradition of a man who 2,000 years earlier said, "I know that I know nothing." Hume gives that phrase new weight, scientific, secular, and terrifyingly honest. In Paris, Diderot isn't writing philosophy. He's building a revolution one page at a time. The encyclopedia isn't just a book. It's a weapon. Its goal? To give every person the power to question. Socrates appears throughout quoted, cited, praised. But more than that, the tone of Socrates, ironic, skeptical, playful, permeates the entire project. We must dare to know, Diderot declares. And Socrates dared first. Then come the storms. The Bastille falls. Guillotines rise. Robespierre speaks of virtue and sends men to their deaths. In the chaos, Socrates becomes both idol and warning. He reminds revolutionaries to listen to conscience, not vengeance. He reminds judges that law must serve truth. He reminds citizens that reason is not infallible. It must be tempered with humility. Some quote him before going to the scaffold. Others curse his memory as too passive, too patient. But his presence lingers in every courtroom, every manifesto, every defiant whisper. Far from the fires of Paris, in quiet Kingsburg, Immanuel Kant writes by lamplight. Sapere aude. Dare to know. It becomes the slogan of the Enlightenment. To Kant, Socrates is not a rebel, but a moral guide. Not a destroyer, but a builder of inner law. He doesn't see Socrates as a martyr. He sees him as the first philosopher of duty, one who asks not, "What do others think is good?" but "What does reason tell me I must do?" Kant transforms Socratic inquiry into ethical certainty. The Enlightenment, for him, is not a rejection of morality, but its awakening. By the dawn of the 19th century, Socrates has become more than a man. He is the thinker who questions all authority, the martyr who refuses to betray the truth, the example of humility in a world of arrogance. He is sculpted into monuments, quoted in constitutions. He is painted with the calm of a man who fears nothing but ignorance. To some, he is the ideal Enlightenment citizen. To others, a reminder that freedom has a price. Either way, his voice still cuts through the noise. What is the good life? And have you asked yourself? You walk once more through the darkened streets of Paris. The revolution has ended. The empire will rise. The world is changing again. But on a wall, freshly scrawled in charcoal, you see a phrase. Socrates. Lives. Think freely. And you smile. Because even here, after war, after terror, after enlightenment, he endures. Not as a statue, not as a saint, but as a spirit, asking, challenging, guiding. You stand on a cobbled street outside Independence Hall. The smell of ink, old paper, sweat, and revolution clings to the city. Inside, behind shuttered windows, a group of men argue. Not with fists or muskets, but with words, paragraphs, clauses, questions. And though they do not speak his name, Socrates is in the room, not in spirit. In substance, his voice hums beneath every debate. What is justice? What is virtue? What makes a law good, rather than merely enforced? You're not just witnessing the writing of a constitution. You're watching Athens reborn in a new world. With new stakes, Thomas Jefferson walks beside you in a candlelit study. His shelves overflow with Greek texts. He quotes Socrates the way others quote scripture. Freedom is the firstborn child of reason. To Jefferson, Socrates isn't a relic of philosophy. He is the first man who lived free in mind, even under the shadow of death. Jefferson writes letters where he urges the young republic to question authority, to doubt what is taught, and to seek truth with courage. Sound familiar? I know that I know nothing. The humility of that line forms the foundation of liberty, because if no one knows everything, then no one should rule without challenge. Inside the hot, crowded chamber, James Madison drafts the U.S. Constitution. There's no direct mention of Socrates, but you feel him in every clause. Checks and balances, because certainty is dangerous. 3 branches of government, because no one deserves unchecked truth. Trial by jury, because dialogue not decree is the soul of justice. The entire structure breathes Socratic caution. Be suspicious of power. All men must be questioned, even ourselves. Madison writes not for control, but for conversation perpetual, imperfect, but alive. You walk into a small town hall. In New England, it's loud. It's messy. Farmers argue over taxes. A schoolteacher interrupts. A teenage girl takes notes. There's no king, no oracle. Just citizens reasoning in real time. And it hits you. This is the Socratic method scaled up. Democracy isn't just votes. It's the right to speak, to be wrong, to be heard, to change. In ancient Athens, citizenship was participation in public thought. In the new republic, it's the same. Socrates would recognize this chaos, and he'd call it glorious. In a single-room schoolhouse, a teacher holds up a worn copy of Plato's Apology. Children read aloud. The unexamined life is not worth living. This isn't abstract. It's preparation for democracy. Because in a world where truth is debated, a citizen must be more than obedient. They must be wise. Socratic education doesn't fill minds. It sharpens them to see through slogans, to dissect demagogues, to argue without hatred. Democracy needs schools not to teach answers, but to train questioners. But step outside. This ideal, you hear chains, see women silenced, watch treaties broken. Slavery thrives, native lands vanish. The ballot is guarded by race and gender. Would Socrates approve? No. He would walk into the heart of this new Athens and ask, how? Can a free society be built on the suffering of the voiceless? Socrates challenged the elites of his own time, and he challenged these too, not with a sword, with shame, with questions they couldn't answer. And that's the point. Democracy isn't self-righteous, it's self-correcting. When it works. Fast forward. The Civil War tears the Republic apart. Frederick Douglass stands before a white audience and recites lines from Plato. He doesn't shout. He questions. He asks, how can you speak of liberty while holding your brother in chains? He speaks in the spirit of Socrates, not to destroy, but to disrupt illusion. Abraham Lincoln, too, builds arguments brick by brick, reasoned, restrained. Devastating. He says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. But he doesn't impose. He persuades. He asks America to think. That's not rhetoric. That's Socratic discipline in political form. Years pass. The town halls become digital. The Constitution is amended, revised, challenged. But Socrates is still there, in a protester's placard asking, what is justice? In a courtroom defending the right to speak unpopular truths. In a debate where a student raises their hand and says, why? Socrates doesn't belong to Greece anymore. He belongs to every democracy that dares to be honest. Today, democracy feels fragile. Misinformation spreads faster than reason. Outrage is monetized. Debate is replaced by performative certainty. And yet, the question returns. Will you think for yourself, even when it costs you? That's the Socratic challenge. And it's the only thing that keeps democracy alive. Not votes, not courts, but citizens who question, citizens who reflect, citizens who ask, is this right? And if not, what should be? London, 1860. Steam fogs the city. Brains fire brighter than boilers. You walk the streets of Victorian London. The gas lamps glow against a curtain of soot and mist. The world smells like ink, coal, and coffee. Everything is changing quickly. Carriages have given way to trains. Letters cross continents in seconds. Diseases are named. Electricity is tamed. The heavens, once the realm of gods, are charted by telescopes and algebra. This is the age of science. The universe is no longer enchanted. It's measurable, mapped, explained, and yet beneath all the certainty one ancient voice still whispers, what do you really know? And how do you know it? That voice is Socrates. He never held a microscope. He never weighed an element. But his method, his relentless questioning, gave birth to a new world. You step into a Cambridge lecture hall. A man with a tight collar draws diagrams of atoms and planetary motion. This is the structure of the universe, he says. The chalk screeches. Students nod. But a young woman in the back raises her hand. But why does it work that way? The professor pauses. He smiles. A Socratic moment is born. Science is often thought of as sterile, mathematical, absolute. But its roots are tangled with curiosity, doubt, and disruption, the very tools Socrates forged centuries earlier in Athens. The scientific method seems new. Form a hypothesis. Test it. Disprove it if you can. But look closer. It is a refined echo of the Socratic method. Begin with a claim. Challenge it. Break it apart until the falsehood falls away. Socrates asked, what is justice? Now Darwin asks, what is the origin of life? Newton asks, what is force? The targets change. The discipline remains. Don't believe. Understand? In 1859, On the Origin of Species is published. Charles Darwin has cracked the biological code of life, but he doesn't roar with certainty. He writes like a man still whispering to Socrates. There is grandeur in this view of life, but I offer it only as a theory, not as divine truth. He's attacked by clergy, mocked by aristocrats, but he doesn't fight them. He lets the evidence speak. He is Socratic in spirit, willing to think what others fear. Huxley becomes Darwin's voice in public. He doesn't ask for belief. He demands logic. Science commits suicide when it adopts a creed. When Huxley faces a bishop in debate, he doesn't shout. He asks, is it better to think for oneself or to accept answers from tradition? That's not science talking. That's Socrates in a lab coat. But science doesn't just answer questions. It kills certainties. The soul becomes psychology. The heavens become physics. God becomes optional. The result? A silent panic. If all is matter, where is meaning? People turn to materialism, some to nihilism, others to nationalism. But a few, very few, remember the old Athenian who warned, the most dangerous lie is the one we tell ourselves. Science may show us how the world works. Socrates reminds us to ask, why does that matter? Mill walks the halls of Parliament, with Plato in one hand and policy in the other. He writes about democracy, rights, and freedom, not as slogans, but as moral puzzles. A person must be allowed to think incorrectly, if we are to think correctly at all. This is the Socratic paradox alive in a modern mind. You cannot protect truth by force. You must earn it in open dialogue. Mill doesn't just defend science. He defends conscience. You visit a 19th century observatory. The stars above are being mapped, named, predicted. It feels triumphant. But the lead astronomer leans over to you and whispers, "We are no closer to knowing why any of it exists." This is the hidden truth of the scientific revolution. The universe is vast, the mind is small, and truth must be pursued, never possessed. Socrates would have smiled at this, not because he doubted science, but because he trusted the endlessness of the question. The steam fades. The factories grow quiet, and still the questions remain. Should we use science to create or to conquer? What is ethical in a world run by equations? Does knowledge make us better or just stronger? These aren't empirical questions. They are moral ones, Socratic ones. And in every ethical debate that science cannot resolve, voice of Socrates returns uninvited, unstoppable. Are you sure? Have you thought it through? And if not, why do you believe it? Paris, 1945. The smoke has cleared, but the soul remains haunted. You walk beneath the scarred archways of a battered Paris. The war is over. The occupation has ended. But the silence carries a weight that victory cannot lift. In cafes once, overrun by Nazi boots, thinkers gather with wine-stained notebooks and eyes full of unrest. They don't speak of gods or formulas. They speak of meaning, or rather its disappearance. And yet, seated among the shadows and the cigarette smoke, a familiar voice rises, not loud, but steady. Not French, but Greek. Let us examine the life worth living. That voice doesn't belong to any one person here. It's Socrates, returning once again, when the world needs him most. Europe has been torn apart by ideology, by fascism, by silence in the face of horror. Auschwitz, Stalingrad, Hiroshima. Entire worldviews have collapsed in on themselves. God, once omnipresent, is now in question. Science, once promising progress, has built bombs. Politics, once idealistic, has orchestrated genocide. So what now? The existentialists begin not with hope or structure, but with truth. You are alone. The world is absurd. There is no fixed meaning, but there is freedom. And that is where Socrates re-enters, not with theology, but with tools. You sit at Café de Flore. Sartre leans over a journal. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Socrates had said it differently, in an Athenian accent. Know thyself. Both speak to the same truth. Identity is not inherited. It is constructed deliberately. Sartre builds on this. He says we are not born with purpose. We create it moment by moment, choice by choice. Socrates had refused the comforts of blind obedience. Now Sartre does the same, rejecting religion, rejecting tradition, and instead offering you the hardest gift of all, radical freedom. Beside Sartre sits Simone de Beauvoir, intellectual titan, feminist icon, philosopher of becoming. She doesn't offer rules. She offers questions. Questions that echo Socrates. What does it mean to live authentically? How do I live without denying the freedom of others? What is responsibility, if not the recognition of our own agency? She writes, to will oneself moral is to will oneself free. Like Socrates, she rejects empty virtue. She replaces it with ethical attention to self, to others, to the world in motion. And like Socrates, she knows that ethics begins not in doctrine, but in doubt. You overhear a conversation about bad faith, Sartre's term for the lies we tell ourselves. Pretending you're not free, hiding behind roles, blaming fate. Socrates saw it too. In the streets of Athens, he confronted priests, generals, craftsmen, people who claimed wisdom, but never examined their beliefs. I know that I know nothing, he said, not as a joke, but as liberation. To both Socrates and the existentialists, The worst lie is the one you believe out of convenience. Truth isn't a comfort. It's a confrontation. You walk through Père Lachaise Cemetery. The names on the stones are both monumental and forgotten. Camus once stood here. He called death the only serious philosophical question. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. The gods are silent. Nature doesn't care. Death is certain. So what now? Socrates answered that question in prison, with hemlock in hand and composure in his soul. He chose death over betraying his method. He accepted mortality without metaphysical bribes. That's not despair. That's dignity. Camus never called himself an existentialist, but he fought the same battles. In the myth of Sisyphus, he imagines a man condemned to push a boulder for eternity. But the man doesn't cry. He rebels. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Like Socrates, Camus rejected escape. He chose lucidity, the clear, painful sight of what is, and the strength to live anyway. No illusions, no gods, just the human will to create meaning from chaos. That is the Socratic spirit, resilient, ethical, awake. You leave the cafe. The city is still broken in places. But the ideas here are whole, brutal, beautiful, unfinished. You realize the existentialists didn't kill hope. They liberated it. They tore it from myth and handed it back to you. Socrates did the same. He didn't give answers. He gave you the method to find them inside yourself. He gave you the courage to question and the freedom to live with your answers. As the streetlights flicker, you catch your reflection in a cafe window. You're not the same person you were before this walk through post-war philosophy. You understand now? Socrates did not belong to Athens. He belongs to every era brave enough to doubt itself. And when meaning collapses, when gods fall silent, when the future feels blank, that's when his voice returns. Let us begin again with a question. Your bedroom at 2:17 a.m. A screen glows. You haven't blinked in minutes. You're not sure why you're still scrolling. 1 minute you were looking for a recipe. Now, 3 hours later, you've watched 17 videos, liked 12 memes, doom-scrolled through war, drama, and celebrity scandal, and still, you feel hollow. You are in the most connected age in human history, and yet you feel untethered. That question returns, sharp as ever. What am I doing with my life? That's not an algorithm talking. That's Socrates. And in this world of screens, filters, notifications, and artificial intelligence, he's never been more needed. Truth used to be hard to find. Now it's hard to recognize. One click says the climate is collapsing. Another says it's a hoax. One video praises a politician. The next tears them apart. Everyone talks. Few listen. And the loudest opinions win. But Socrates didn't believe in noise. He believed in clarity. And clarity begins with a question. How do you know what you claim to know? He wouldn't scroll. He wouldn't rage post. He'd lean in, look you in the eye, and ask, why do you believe that? And if you couldn't answer, he wouldn't mock you. He'd guide you gently, relentlessly, until you found your own truth or admitted you didn't have one yet. Swipe, filter, curate. Online. You can be anyone. A version of yourself with better lighting, more confidence, more opinions, more applause. But Socrates didn't care how you looked. He cared who you were. He walked barefoot through Athens, not to impress, but to probe. Are your beliefs yours? Or are you just repeating what gets likes? Have you thought deeply or just echoed loudly? He wasn't afraid to be disliked, because he knew a person's worth wasn't found in applause, that it was found in integrity. Social media promised community. It delivered isolation, that we shout at avatars. We block disagreement. We mistake validation for conversation, that the ancient agora where Socrates debated strangers in the open air has been replaced by echo chambers. But real thinking happens between people who disagree. Socrates didn't fear confrontation. He thrived on it not to win, but to understand. He showed us that being wrong wasn't failure. It was progress. Today, we need more than followers. We need Socratic courage to ask uncomfortable questions, to challenge ideas with humility, to listen without preparing to reply. Now we talk to machines. We ask AI to write poems, answer emails, give therapy, solve problems. It's efficient, impressive, scary. But Socrates would remind us, real wisdom isn't fast. It's earned. Chatbots can answer, but they can't care. They can mimic, but they can't mean. Socrates would welcome I not as a threat, but as a test. Can we stay human in a world of simulations? Can we keep questioning, even when the answers are instant? Asterisk, asterisk, he would say. Use the tools, but don't become one. We are overstimulated, under-reflective. We know how to react, but not how to pause. Anxiety is everywhere. Depression too. Not because we're weak, but because we've been disconnected from depth. Socrates believed your soul needed care like your body. He asked questions not just to debate, but to heal. To help you understand what you fear, what you value, what you seek. He didn't offer therapy. He offered examination. And in a world obsessed with quick fixes, he'd say the real cure lies in slowing down and thinking bravely. Who decides what you see? Every click trains a machine. Every share shapes your feed. Every search becomes part of your profile. And yet we rarely ask, who benefits from this? Socrates warned of unexamined power. He would demand transparency, not just from governments, but from platforms. If your attention is being sold, are you truly free? He wouldn't rage against technology. He'd ask what it's doing to your choices and your soul. Socrates spoke of a daemonion, a cozy, quiet inner voice that stopped him when he strayed. In our age of constant distraction, that voice is faint, but it's still there. Asks, is this who you want to be? Are you proud of how you speak online? What are you running from when you scroll? That voice is Socratic. Not divine, just human. Just honest. And maybe, just maybe, it's trying to lead you back to yourself. Close the app. You sit in silence. The world hasn't changed, but something inside you has. You realize the true danger isn't that we've become too digital. It's that we've stopped asking if this is the life we want to live. Socrates isn't on your feed. He's in your reflection, waiting to ask, are you ready to examine your life? Not to win arguments, but to wake up. Because even now, even here, the unexamined life is still not worth living. A mirror, your reflection, the edge of every age. There comes a moment, no matter your time or place, when the world goes quiet just long enough for you to hear it. A voice, not booming, not divine, just human. And it asks, are you living the life you were meant to examine? That voice isn't from an influencer, a president, a preacher, or a prophet. It's from a man long dead. A man who walked barefoot through a city that doesn't exist anymore. A man who never wrote a word. His name was Socrates. And somehow, impossibly, he's still speaking to you. Strip away the marble busts, the togas, the hemlock. What remains isn't myth. It's a challenge. Socrates is not remembered because of what he believed. He's remembered because of how he lived. He asked when others obeyed. He doubted when others cheered. He stood firm when others bent. He chose truth over comfort, even when it killed him. He isn't a relic. He's a mirror held up to every generation that thinks it's wise. And when you look into that mirror, he doesn't scold. He just asks, is this really who you are? Why did Athens kill him? Not because he was wrong, but because he made. Others admit that they were. Socrates didn't overthrow the city. He dismantled certainty. He didn't raise a sword. He raised questions. And that was enough to shake an empire. That's why dictators hate philosophers. That's why tyrants fear education. That's why propaganda prefers answers over inquiry. Because the truth is, one honest question can threaten 1,000 lies. In your world, Socrates would be terrifying, not because he'd reject your phone or criticize your politics, but because he'd look straight through your performance. He'd see what the algorithms miss, the fear behind your opinions, the loneliness behind your feed, the longing behind your confidence. And he wouldn't judge you. He'd sit down beside you in silence, and then he'd say, "Let's begin." Socrates wasn't trying to win debates. He wasn't trying to be admired. He didn't care about followers, gold, or legacy. He only cared about one thing. Are we living as honestly as we can? His conversations weren't traps. They were gifts. He wanted you to be free, not just politically, but spiritually. Free from illusion, free from ego, free from false knowledge. And that freedom, that internal liberation, was the one thing no regime could confiscate. The unexamined life is not worth living. It sounds harsh, but Socrates didn't mean it as condemnation. He meant it as invitation. To examine your life is to reclaim it from autopilot, from expectation, from everyone else's story about who you should be. It's not a call to perfection. It's a call to presence, to know what you value, to know why you act, to live on purpose. You might never quote Plato. You might never read a single dialogue. But if you've ever paused to wonder if you're on the right path, if you've ever stayed awake, questioning a belief you used to hold, if you've ever chosen to tell the truth, even when it hurt, then Socrates is already alive in you. He walks beside teachers who encourage doubt. He lives in children who ask, "Why?" 5 times in a row. He stands with protesters demanding justice, not slogans. He is not in the past. He is in every moment that resists the easy answer. In a world desperate for answers, Socrates gives you a question. It is not comfortable. It is not easy. But it is yours. What kind of life is worth living? Not what kind of job, not what kind of car, not what kind of image, what kind of life? That's the question Socrates died for, and the one you're now free to ask again and again and again, because empires crumble, technologies change, names are forgotten, but the examined life, that survives.